The Mummy Returns may not be as fondly remembered as the original, but I've always been a fan. In and amongst some janky CG, a more kid-friendly approach, and some interesting reincarnation plotlines, it's still a pulpy, fun throwback that, at the end of the day, still gave us plenty of Brendan Fraser, Rachel Weisz, and Oded Fehr being cool and killing loads of mummies. Also, The Rock was there, and he seemed to be having a pretty good time. And like that 1999 movie, there's also plenty in the sequel that you may have missed. So, I'm Ewan, this is What Culture, and here are 20 things you somehow missed in The Mummy Returns. Number 20. No stunt doubles for this one scene. Midway through the movie, Rachel Weisz's Evelyn unlocks memories of her previous life as Princess Nefertiti, the daughter of Pharaoh Seti I, and specifically a fight Nefertiti had with the Naxudamun, the pharaoh's mistress, of course played by Patricia Velasquez. Now, despite the elaborate nature of the battle, which involves weapons and loads of really cool flips, both actors reportedly shot the scene without the help of any stunt professionals whatsoever. More to the point, they actually spent an entire 5 months training to shoot this one sequence, which is a lot for a mere 2-minute scene, but considering how great the end result looks, it's fair to say that the time investment was most certainly worth it. Number 19. Anubis's cameo. In the movie's opening sequence, we learn the backstory of Mateus, aka the Scorpion King, played of course by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, who, while defeated and on the brink of death, made a pact with the god Anubis to trade his soul in exchange for lots of power to defeat his enemies. And so, we see Mateus's pact allowing him to lead an army of jackal-like creatures to overpower his foes. But when the deed is done and Anubis comes to collect on his soul, for about 3 seconds, the distinctly predator-looking god can be seen hanging out in the background of the frame. As Mateus celebrates his evident victory, the masked god is briefly visible in the fiery periphery, moments before he claims his soul and turns his army to dust. I'd never noticed this until recording this actual entry, so yeah, a thing I genuinely missed too. Number 18. Ardeth Bey doesn't say Imhotep's name outside of narration. Magi chieftain Ardeth Bey, an absolute hero, is also an undeniable fan-favorite character in the franchise, and he gets the interesting distinction of being the only character to intentionally avoid referring to the villainous Imhotep, Arnold Vosloo, by his actual name. Rather, Bey calls Imhotep the creature throughout the movie, a seemingly odd affectation once you realize it, albeit one that's actually explained in The Mummy Returns' novelization, written by John Whitman. In the book, it's revealed that Bey, and the Magi in general, are fearful enough of Imhotep they choose not to speak his name while he's resurrected, instead calling him He That Shall Not Be Named. By novel's end, Bey does conquer his fear, however, and eventually calls him Imhotep. In the movie though, well, not so much. Number 17. That's not the real British Museum. If you know your British geography and architecture, you might have noticed that the brief exterior shots of the legendary British Museum aren't really the British Museum at all. In actual fact, because the museum was undergoing external renovations and was covered in scaffolding when the film was being shot, it was unusable throughout its production. And so, the crew scouted similar locations around the nation's capital and settled upon University College London instead. And to the filmmakers' credit, the two buildings look incredibly similar with their pillared exteriors. The only major difference being that UCL has a big old dome on top of its roof. Number 16. What Hakuma Kente actually means. During the opening sequence, where the Scorpion King leads his 1,000-strong army into battle at Thebes, we hear him let out a battle cry, Hakuma Kente. And while the dialogue isn't subtitled, you might reasonably assume that he's saying something incredibly badass, like, "Tonight we feast on the blood of our enemies," or "Can you smell what the Scorpion King is cooking?" or something like that. But no, as it turns out, the Akkadian battle cry actually loosely translates to "It's hot as hell," a seemingly meta joke about the sequence being filmed in blisteringly hot Morocco, albeit one that's gonna fly over most of the audience's head when they're watching. Number 15. Imhotep's juicy form barely features. One of the most memorable moments from the first Mummy movie sees Rick, Evelyn, and Jonathan, played by John Hannah, stumble upon Imhotep's remains and note how unexpectedly juicy they are. And of course, when we glimpse Imhotep throughout the movie, he most often retains his monstrously moist, half-decomposed form. Yet, in the sequel, we rarely see so much of the juiciness at all. The juice is not loose, it is pent up. Juicy Imhotep shows up for just a brief sequence in the middle of the movie, with Arnold Vosloo's decidedly not rotted human form getting far more of the limelight instead. It's a bit of a shame considering how wonderfully gross he looks as a legit mummy, though this may well have been a conscious production choice to keep the movie's hefty budget down by avoiding excess CG. Number 14. Some staple early 2000s castings. It's always fun watching older movies and noting the casting trends of the era, and Mummy Returns is certainly no different, with a number of actors who were everywhere in the early 2000s having notable roles in the film. First and foremost, there's the brilliant Adewale Akinnuoye Agbaje, best known for his roles on Oz and Lost, who has a supporting role as cult enforcer Loch Na. You may have also recognized him from The Bourne Identity, which is also a brilliant movie. Elsewhere, we have Tom Fisher, who popped up in a bevy of huge movies at the turn of the millennium, including Enigma, Mean Machine, Shanghai Nights, and Van Helsing, and who plays Thief Spivvy here. And finally, there's Alan Armstrong, one of the most recognizable that guy Brit character actors who has more than 150 credits to his name, including his role as cult leader Baltus Hafez in this movie. Patriot Games always springs to mind for me, but the dude has gotten around. Number 13. The totally not venomous snake. When Rick and Evelyn are exploring an ancient ruin right at the start of the movie, Evelyn kicks a snake away, the implication being that it's venomous and therefore best avoided. Yet this scene likely annoyed the snake enthusiasts out there, given that this is actually very clearly a milk snake, a random slitherer that's not at all venomous in the slightest. More to the point, they have small teeth, can't rattle their tails, and are generally incredibly docile, so pose basically zero risk to humans in any way. Though it's not always 100% reliable, the famous maxim for differentiating venomous snakes from harmless ones goes, "Red on black, you're okay, Jack. Red on yellow, could kill a fellow." I'd say that I'd remember that, but that would mean dislodging the Ned Flanders side of town quote, and well, we both know that's not gonna happen. Number 12. Mila's outfit mirrors Anck-su-namun's body paint. Here's one you'll probably kick yourself for not spotting sooner. In both of the first two Mummy movies, we see Imhotep's lover Anck-su-namun wearing distinctive body paint, which forms a memorable pattern down her arms. And the outfit worn by her physical reincarnation, Mila Nice, is a direct reflection of this, with the chic black getup she wears throughout the movie bearing the very same ladder-like pattern running down its arm. Number 11. Where did the fourth mummy go? No, this entry isn't about how we've been waiting for that long-belated fourth Mummy film for what feels like forever, but instead a slight continuity error you may have missed. During the end of first act action sequence where the O'Connells escape the British Museum on a London bus, we see 4 mummified guards emerge from the museum and give chase. Except, if you're keeping score throughout the scene, we only ever actually see 3 of the mummies get put down for the count, leaving one bafflingly unaccounted for on the streets of London. Maybe he went to a pub and drowned his sorrows, or got run over by an overeager cabbie. Either way, if you've seen that fourth mummy, please get in touch with us. His mummy family are very concerned. Now, as it turns out, this wasn't so much a mistake as it was an editorial decision. In the original version of the scene, the fourth mummy attacked the heroes after the bus came to a stop, but director Stephen Sommers ended up cutting this beat for pacing reasons. Sommers felt that the audience had seen enough mummy shenanigans by this point and wanted to get back to the plot, so cleaved this climactic moment away and hoped that fans wouldn't notice. And in fairness, I don't think many of us did. Number 10. Rick's house seems familiar. If parts of the O'Connell household seem strangely familiar, well, there's absolutely a good reason for that. The production indeed returned to a location they used in the previous Mummy film and sneakily recycled it. Those crafty movie makers. For the library section of the O'Connell mansion glimpsed in the movie, the filmmakers returned to Buckinghamshire's Mentmore Towers. In the first Mummy, this lavish 19th century county house served as the interior for Cairo's Museum of Antiquities, while in The Mummy Returns, it was repurposed to serve as the O'Connell family's lush abode, primarily for exterior shots. Such is the wonderful nonsense of filmmaking. Everything's a lie, but we willingly buy into it, most of the time. Number 9. So many callbacks. Callbacks in sequels aren't exactly uncommon, but this film has a few sneaky ones that might have crept past you. While you probably realise that Rick and Evelyn's son Alex knocking over the pillars at the start of the movie is a nod to Evelyn doing the very same thing in the Cairo Museum's library in the previous film, here's one you might have missed. When the O'Connell household is under attack near the start of the film, Evelyn gets pushed against a wall by a cultist, at which point she knees him in the groin, knees him in the head, and then punches him to the floor. A moment later, Evelyn tells Alex, "That I learned from your father," and she's not wrong. Rick does the exact same move when a foe shoves him against a pillar in the very first Mummy film. Number 8. Director Stephen Sommers' real cameo. It's often mistakenly said that director Stephen Sommers has a cameo as the man sitting in the bathtub at Izzy's place, but this isn't true. Well, not quite at least. On the film's DVD commentary, Sommers confirmed that he did provide the faint humming which can be heard as Evelyn stares at the man soaking in the tub, but that's about as far as it goes. His real cameo comes about 5 minutes later when we cut to the train upon which the villains are transporting a kidnapped Alex. Lochnar takes Alex to the bathroom, at which point some grubby, shall we say, handprints can be seen smeared all over the toilet's walls. And these handprints were made by Sommers himself, marking his most significant front-of-camera contribution to the movie. Number 7. The timeline doesn't make sense. Granted, you're probably better off not sweating the details where continuity is concerned in a movie like this, but all the same, Mummy Returns' timeline doesn't make much sense at all. It's made unambiguously clear at the start of the film that it's set in 1933, and a little later, Alex mentions that he's only 8 years old, placing his birth year at 1925, while quite possibly being conceived in 1924. Except, we know from the first Mummy movie that Rick and Evelyn didn't meet until 1926, making Alex's own self-stated age kind of impossible. Ah well, these simple things that can get lost in the shuffle when you're making a big, massive Hollywood blockbuster. Number 6. Nefertiti and Anaxunamun's face-off is foreshadowed. The aforementioned fight scene between Princess Nefertiti and Anaxunamun is actually slightly foreshadowed right at the start of the film. In the very first shot in which she appears in The Mummy Returns, we see Evelyn dusting away at an ancient mural, which, upon closer inspection, appears to show two women fighting with bladed weapons. Gee, doesn't that sound familiar? Well, it is, of course, a dead accurate rendition of the historic fight between Nefertiti and Anaxunamun we see later on, from the weapons down to the clothing the two ladies wear during the clash. And yet, the scene is just dusty and low lit enough that you couldn't be blamed too much for failing to notice it. Number 5. Not as many horsemen as it appears. The Mummy Returns arrived at something of an awkward time for visual effects, where CGI could be used to enhance spectacle, but was still a good while away from consistently capturing photorealistic visuals of human beings. Hence the utter monstrosity that is the Scorpion King's infamous final form. Just look at him. So squidgy. Anyway, VFX were used far more impressively near the end of the film, when we see Ardeth Beg and thousands of his Magi warriors battling Anubis's mighty army. While you might have assumed that an early 2000s production of this scale actually took thousands of flesh and blood humans out in the desert, that wasn't nearly true. In fact, there were only 200 extras on horseback for the scene, with CGI being used to multiply this number to the order of 10,000 for the epic sweeping wide shots of the soldiers riding towards Anubis's army. And honestly, unlike other certain effects in the movie, oh god, not again, this one holds up pretty damn well. Number 4. A nod to Dr. Strangelove. Deep into the third act, when Rick blows up a tree, in turn causing a group of pygmy mummies to fall into the ravine below, keep a close eye on one of the scary fellas who is standing on the tree when it explodes. As the tree tumbles down the ravine, we can just barely see one pygmy sitting astride the tree's remnants, effectively riding it all the way down. This is almost certainly a nod to the iconic scene from Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove, where Major Kong, played by Slim Pickens, similarly rides a nuclear bomb down to the ground in the film's closing moments. Number 3. Brendan Fraser had jokes about the role in Looney Tunes Back in Action. Now here's a fun, deeply meta wink-wink gag about the Mummy films you probably haven't seen because audiences in general didn't really bother showing up for 2003's live-action animated flop, Looney Tunes Back in Action. Something I've never forgiven them for because that movie is fantastic. Like, Steve Martin is the Acme chairman. If you two also spend most of your days reciting his dialogue from that movie, well, I love you, baby. Back in Action stars Brendan Fraser himself as an aspiring stuntman, J.D. Drake, who at one point in the movie turns to Daffy Duck and says, "Did you see those mummy movies? I'm in them more than Brendan Fraser is," to which Daffy rolls his cartoon eyes. It's a great gag, albeit one that's largely been forgotten about due to the movie's box office failings. Boo! If you're a fan of the Renaissance, you owe it to yourself to watch this. Also, while you're here, what is your favorite Brendan Fraser performance? Let us know down in the comments. Number 2. Third time unlucky for Shafak. There's a sly running gag throughout the film where Shafak, played by Quill Roberts, a member of Imhotep's cult, narrowly avoids death numerous times, such as just barely dodging a knife thrown at him by Rick during the scene at the O'Connell mansion. But Shafak's number finally comes up in hilarious fashion much later on, when he and Jonathan are running from the Pygmies and reach a burial ground which Jonathan believes the Pygmies won't enter. Shafak asks Jonathan if he's sure, only for one of the Pygmies to cross the boundary and murder Shafak with a spear to the chest, at which point all Jonathan can do is apologize and run for his life. And number 1. There's an in-joke in the Book of the Dead incantation. At the very end of the film, Alex reads an incantation from the Book of the Dead in order to bring his mother back to life. But if you listen closely, there's an Easter egg nod to one of the movie's cast members hidden within it. One word that Alex says mid-incantation is Vslu, which is suspiciously similar to Vosloo, as in Arnold Vosloo, who of course portrays Imhotep in both of the first 2 Mummy films.